Hey guys, Nick from ArchCityPLO.com and Arch City Poker. This week we are going to implement the poker facts video once again. Of course, got my list here of questions, a couple of them from the comment section from the last video, and I encourage you guys to do that. If you have a question, put it in there. It helps me come up with good questions, new content for you guys. So I do have 5 questions again. I'm going to try to keep this video under 10 minutes if possible. A couple of the questions I'm going to have to get a little bit more in depth, but I'm going to try to keep it pretty basic. And if you guys have follow-up questions, then just let me know in the comment section. So question 1, facing a check raise in position with top pair or an overpair on a two-tone texture. So basically when there's a flush draw available, that question was from Jose from last week. Good question. I would say it really depends on the player. It depends on your population in general. Let's be serious, guys. When you see a check raise in the spot, let's say the flop is Jack 7-5 with 2 spades, it's almost always going to be something like Ace Jack or better. These players are not aggressive enough with flush draws. They're just simply going to have a very equity-driven range, which is constructed of made hands at the top of their range. So if you have a hand like King Jack, Queen Jack, you decided to bet fold in that spot, because I do think in live low stakes games we should do a lot more bet folding than worrying about balance and balancing our checking ranges and such. Then you just exploit these guys by overfolding. You just know they just have it. They allow us to play easily, so you just go ahead and overfold. If you do have a higher level of confidence that their range does include some top pair hands, then you're going to want to probably just call with your overpairs. You might mix in a hand like top set just because it blocks so much. But I would say if you feel like it's an opponent that's going to commit to one pair or an overpair and you have a set, you probably just want to 3-bet jam and avoid scary turn cards that will deny you further action. On the flip side of the equation, if it is an opponent that you think is capable of having a flush draw, usually I would just call with flush draws myself, because if I have a flush draw in my hand and I am blocking a lot of their semi-bluffs, it makes it a little bit more likely that they have a good made hand in their range, that if we 3-bet jam with our flush draw, we're probably just gambling in an inefficient manner. Now, I'm not saying you never, you don't want to sometimes include some nut flush draws. You do, because I think a lot of those guys that play aggressive enough in those types of games, I think they're the types of guys that are there to gamble, to be honest. And if they're going to commit with a worse flush draw, then why not get in there with a dominating flush draw yourself? So I would mix in some nut flush draws in your 3-betting range against those more aggressive opponents. But in general, I probably would just call with most of my flush draws, even some of the nut flush draws, for the reasons that I said about blocking their semi-bluffs. I also would mix in some top pair hands, maybe some overpairs. Aces or kings are the ones that players always get held up on in this spot. It depends on how much money is left. If you guys started with only 100 bigs, then you probably can commit with a 3-bet shove, especially when you do not have a flush draw blocking card. So let's say there's 2 spades, Jack 7-5. If you have aces or kings and you do not have a spade, then you can jam a little bit more often. But if you have a spade, I probably would err on the side of calling a little bit more often, because if you have one of those spades again, if you're blocking some of their semi-bluffs, they're going to be a little bit more made hand heavy, like 2 pairs and sets that would beat you. So that's a quick little synopsis as far as that question's concerned. Jose, if I missed anything or if you have a follow-up, just let me know in the comment section. Question 2, most common live PLO leak and the best PLO exploit. That is from Jacob. I would say the most common one would be just simply playing too many hands pre-flop. I run into a ton of reasonable no-limit players. Let's say they played 20% of hands in a live 9-handed full ring game. I see them go over to PLO and play 70 to 80% of their hands. And there's a big misconception that with 2 extra cards in your hand, you just flop more, so you should be in there more. The problem with that is you're generally going to be putting yourself in a position where you're dominated too often with your made hands, with your draws. These guys, there's also a misconception that players hear about live PLO games, or they go over and they might rail them. Maybe you played in your first one recently and you just see there's so much action, everybody's playing a lot of hands. They're all wrong, guys. I have rarely run into a live PLO player that I think is very competent. So You just need to play less hands. You need to focus on playing a tighter range, playing hands that have a lot of nuttiness. Like if they flop anything, they're flopping really nutty made hands, or they're flopping nut draws. That is a situation where we just exploit them by basically just playing a strong pre-flop range. Question 3, what do I do with sets on flush completing turns and no limit hold'em? Pretty much just bet fold 'em, guys. These, more often than not, the live low stakes populations are not going to bluff raise turn completing flush cards to try to get you off of hands near the top of your range. They just simply, when they check raise, are going to have flushes just way more often than not. If there are enough implied odds for you to bet and call, if there's really deep stacks, you have a feeling this guy's going to pay you off even if the board pairs up, then you can bet call. But generally, I would say they would raise large enough to where you probably don't have the odds to continue, and you can exploitatively fold sets. Now, a lot of you will say, well, don't we want to avoid that situation then? We don't really want to bet fold a set in case they are bluffing. They're just not bluffing often enough. If you have an opponent that you think is capable of getting really aggressive in that spot, then you might want to check back some of your sets, but you really just want to bet fold against most everybody else because they're going to call with worse hands. You're going to get some, or you might be able to deny some equity if they do have like a 4-card flush draw type of hand, but you at least want to charge the rest of their range because you still are pretty high up in your range with a set. Now, the most important point that I want to make about this question is I think exploitatively you should just size down, because if you size up and polarize your range, I don't think you're going to get action from worse often enough in that spot. You probably will only just get action mainly from essentially flushes, maybe even better sets if you don't have top set. So I would bet smaller, and I would mix in some middling to weaker flushes in there as well so you can show up with some flushes. But generally just go ahead and continue to bet fold in that spot. 4th question, best training sites. You guys are probably going to think I'm just going to shill my own site, but it depends on fit. If you are playing mostly online poker, if you're a mid-stakes player, you're trying to make it to higher stakes, if you're trying to work with solver outputs like solver equations, get instruction from high-stakes players, some of the best in the world, then you're going to want to choose sites like Run It Once. I think Upswing has a mix of stuff. I'm not really sure how much Doug and Ryan Fee are doing with that site now. I know they have other guys that are working on that site, but I think you do want to focus on the sites that cater to that, like the online footage, the solver outputs that, let's say like Jay Nanda's, his site has a lot of that type of content. Regardless of what you think of any of these guys personally, I don't really care about that stuff, but just it's really about how, best fit. Now, on my channel, I think a lot of you guys are live low stakes players. You're going to want to focus on the sites that cater to those types of games and that type of population. So I do think my site is a great fit for that. I think Bart Hansen does a pretty good job with Crush Live Poker from the little content that I've seen. I think Jonathan Little does a good job. So it's not like you can't be subscribed to more than one site. And if I think somebody does a good job, I'm going to say it, and you guys can check out, any of those sites. But I would say at the end of the day, probably do go over to my site and check it out because there's some good content on there. 5th and final question, should I play online poker in the U.S.? Well, that is a good question. And I would say, for most states, it's going to be the unregulated sites like Ignition, Bovada, Bet Online, ACR. Right now, I would probably avoid ACR. It seems like just too often there's just weird stuff going on there, confirmed bots and all that. The other sites, though, so far it seems like they're all right. My biggest thing is just don't put money on there that you can't afford to lose. Like I put small amounts of money on there just to create videos for my site, to get some hands in to shake any rust off if I'm busy with instruction and I can't play as much live poker in a week or a couple week period. But if you guys do want to get faster or get better a lot faster, then you probably do want to play a little bit online and get some more hands in. And that will put you in more spots. You'll be able to just get more repetitions, and I think that's important. So if you guys have any questions or comments, as usual, go ahead and let me know. Hit the link to archcityplo.com. Come on over to the site, take a look. I think there's a lot of great content for you guys on there. Otherwise, if you do like this format, I get more positive feedback. I'll continue to make videos in this format. And go ahead and hit the subscribe button, share the video, and otherwise I'll see you guys next week. Thanks.